All right, we talked early on this morning about the case interview mindset, how to open, analyze, and close the case, sort of the generic steps. And what we do now is talk about actual frameworks. So what I call matching specific case situations to specific problem-solving frameworks, and we'll go through each one, demonstrate those. That will take sort of till lunch. We'll break at lunch at 12:15, be about an hour or so. Come back in the afternoon, finish up different kinds of cases, and then finish off the day on how to practice and prepare for the interviews, as well as some final tips. Okay? Any other sort of administrative questions? All right, great. Okay, so we talked earlier about opening a case, and the last step in opening a case is structuring it, which is defining how we're going to approach the problem solving of the case. So when we talk about common case types, my favorite frameworks, which cases go with which frameworks, and then we're going to demonstrate all this. Okay, here's sort of, in terms of the business situation cases, you don't need to write this down, but you're welcome to if you want to. There's like a whole bunch of business problems out there. Okay? The general thing is they sort of fall into 4 categories. It's more important to remember the categories. I'll talk about in a sec. The first one, which I talked a lot about this morning, is the profit problem. It's a very common way to start off a case. You know, profits are in the tank. What do we do? You know, costs are out of control. What do we do? Revenue's down. What do we do? Okay. And so you're going to have a lot of variations on those. If it's like in a financial services industry, there's like different terms for revenue. So you want to clarify what they mean by certain terms. Sometimes it'll be sort of a pricing-driven problem. So prices have declined, or costs have gone up, fixed costs have gone up, variable costs have gone up. But basically, there's a whole class of problems around revenues and costs. So I always think of it at the framework as profit equals revenue minus cost. If they mention any of those 3 things, you know, usually it's a profitability problem. Okay. The next categorization, and I should also mention that the frameworks I use tend to be a little bit different than some of the things you see out there. I mentioned earlier there are a lot of ways to be right. This is not the only way, it's simply a way. So I just want to put that as a caveat. You'll find that I tend to, like if you look at the case interview books that are out there, they have like all kinds of ideas of like a laundry list of frameworks that you could use. I only have like 4, and they're really only like 3. And the reason I have 3 is because I can't remember like 10. And I figured it was better to know 3 really well than to like sort of forget half of 10 and sort of be sort of caught off guard. The second category of cases is probably the most common one, and I just call it a business situation. And that incorporates what's this company's strategy, what should it be. It incorporates entering a new market. It incorporates, you know, your nephew asks you to start a new business because you're some hotshot Harvard MBA. What should you do? How do you build a lemonade stand? Okay, I actually had that as a case. That was the case I bombed, by the way. It's the only one I really bombed was a lemonade stand. And it's because I thought it was like too simple. And in fact, it had the right answer had demand curves, supply curves, entire demand, and I had like very complicated. He had an entire model built behind the lemonade stand. I sort of assumed it was a simple one. So don't get caught off guard. Don't assume you know things. Use the data in the case. Still got the job. Still got that one. So business situations: entering a new market, introducing a new product. Competitor does X. Should you do Y? So any sort of business situation type of case, I sort of lump into business situations. Mergers and acquisitions. Big company wants to acquire a small company. Should they acquire this particular small company? Okay. That's a mergers and acquisitions. It's really a variation of a business situation. So if you know the business situation approach, then the merger and acquisition one works. And then the last one is a supply-demand framework. Also sort of often used as sort of a way to explore issues around industry capacity. Okay? So in a lot of industries with high fixed costs, so airplanes, for example, the behaviors in that industry sometimes seem crazy, but it's because of this high fixed cost, and we'll talk a little bit about that. But it's an interesting issue. They probably are listed in the order that in the order of frequency. So you probably see profit fairly often, business situation quite often as well. Oftentimes, cases will start off as a profit problem and then move right into a business situation. Okay? Because this is purely math, right? isolate mathematically what's the numerical driver of the problem, but then you have no business context. So a business situation is all about understanding the context of the marketplace, competitors, customers, as well as the company itself. In terms of supply-demand, sometimes the supply-demand or capacity-type problems are acquisition-related. Okay? If they're trying to acquire a company to eliminate it, sometimes a big company will eliminate, buy a competitor just to take the capacity off the market. Sometimes, because of the funny way the supply and demand curves are in that industry. Okay? So if the acquisition is driven by by the capacity issue, then you would want to use a supply-demand framework. If it's more like, we've decided we're going to acquire somebody, should it be this company or that company, that's more of like a business situation. Okay? That's how I sort of define the two. Any type of problem around building or shutting down a factory, which adds capacity, and then any kind of capacity shift in response to demand. So if the issue is, the market's really sort of structurally changed, it's contracted by 20%, likely to be contracted for a long time at 20%, should we shut down the factory? Sort of sounds like a business situation, but it'll probably end up being a supply demand. Okay? So what you're looking for in this process is you're looking for the triggers to figure out which category of problem it is, so you know which framework to match it to. Okay? And I'll just show you, I'll go back and forth real fast here. The 4 core frameworks I have match those categories. So I have a profitability framework I'll show you, business situation, mergers and acquisitions, and a supply-demand framework as well. So I'll give you the telltale signs. The reason I use fewer frameworks is because there's less debate as to which one to use. If they mention profit, revenues, or cost, you can never go wrong starting with the profitability framework. But you'll find that you go through the framework pretty fast, okay, if you know what you're doing. So usually it's like 5, 7, maybe 10 minutes max. If you've never seen it before, you don't really have a business background, you'll be in profit and revenue minus cost all day long, because you won't realize profit is driven by revenue and cost, and so on and so forth. So that's the easiest one because it's just pure math. Okay? And that's not even complicated math either. Business situations is basically the default one. If you don't know what to do, start with business situations. It helps you understand the context of the external environment, the internal environment, and so forth. Mergers and acquisitions, those are very easy to tell because they'll say merge or acquire. Hear the word, it's a keyword phrase, it's a mergers and acquisition case. The only tricky one is whether it's sort of like a fit issue. So should we acquire this particular company versus is it a good idea to acquire someone in general given capacity constraints? So that's the only one that's sort of a little tricky. Okay? And then the other ones around supply and demand are when they mention the word supply, when they mention the word demand, and they give you numbers. That's a big sign. If they give you numbers around supply, that's usually a sign that they want to do the math in a supply and demand curve and literally plot out a curve. An example might be your client, I'll make it up. Your client is, mine's coal, okay? And their cost to produce is, I don't know, $50 per metric ton. I have no idea that's even remotely close. And their nearest competitor has this cost, they can produce a metric ton at $40 per metric ton. Okay? They start mentioning words like that, okay? Dollars to produce, that's like a capacity issue, red flag. You want to start thinking about supply and demand, okay? Does that make sense? If any questions from this morning? I didn't. All right, great. All right, let's do frameworks here. You should all have a handout. If you don't, there are more handouts up front. I'm going to talk first about the profitability framework. So I'm going to pull out your handout, and the 5 pages in the handout were essentially my crib sheet, if you would, the things I would sort of mechanically go through before every interview. It's worth having one of your own. Welcome to use mine. If it doesn't quite work for you, change it. Do one entirely different, up to you. It's good to just have one thing. And what I would do is, when I practice, I would have it in front of me so I could remind myself of the steps, and then I work on memorizing the steps so I could throw it out. Okay, so and initially, again, I mentioned earlier that if you're brand new to cases, it's very mechanical early on, and then you start getting more flexible. And by flexible, actually a good example is, so someone who's mechanically good at cases will say, oh, that's a profit problem. I must use the profit framework. And I can only use the profit framework, and I can't do anything else. And they're going to find that it has limitations. because the profit framework only gives you the mathematical reason why the business is sort of flailing, but not any context as to why. Okay? So the flexibility, where you start getting a little more creative, is in the middle of the profitability framework. You realize, okay, something like why is revenues why is pricing falling through the floor? I know that's what it is mathematically, but why? And then all of a sudden you roll into a business situation. Okay? And then you might be, as the process of going through the business situation, you might realize, wow, this industry has really changed a lot. There are these entire new growth segments that the client is not in participating at all. Maybe they ought to acquire somebody. Okay? And then the question is, what would that happen to industry supply, and how would that change the economics of the industry? So then you roll into like a supply-demand framework. Okay? So that's sort of, I wouldn't say advanced, but sort of medium to advanced. Is you start intermingling between these two. And I like make-up frameworks too. I'll show you how a little bit how to do that when nothing else fits. Okay. Yeah?
Just a quick question.
Sure.
During the interview, are we allowed to jot down notes?
You better. You should.
Okay.
It's impossible to do it well without it.
Okay, good.
Yeah. Also, often you want to do if they want. Sometimes it's interesting. The interview will hand you like a dry erase board marker and start asking you to start doing the case while standing. Okay, so you actually want to practice, drawing on the whiteboard, taking notes, and you won't have your pen and paper there, right? So you want to be able to take your own notes. So you're going to have to write numbers on the side, and then if you have to do that, your notes on one side, and then the official presentation, if you would, in the middle. Okay? So there's a lot of sort of just logistical stuff you want to get used to. Yes?
The combination, you said it would be more difficult if you're moving in between different categories.
Yes.
Would that be something we should expect in a later round interview? Or is it really just sporadic and can be thrown in a first round interview?
Having situations that sort of span across categories, types of cases, you'll see that in the first round, the last round, all kinds of rounds. Okay? And the most common one is really, it's a profit problem, and then, okay, you figure out mathematically what's wrong, but you don't know why it's wrong. And then you don't know what to do about it. So then you have to roll into business. That's sort of by far the most common one. And then the other ones, much less common. Sometimes you move into a supply-demand. That tends to be, by the way, in really high fixed cost industries. It's another side. So airlines. They do all kinds of bizarre, stupid stuff in airlines because the capacity structure and the high fixed cost of that business is just ridiculous. I mean, I find it interesting. I personally made more money than the entire U.S. airline industry in its history of 50 years because I have at least a net worth of $1. Okay? That business has not made $1 in half a century. That they keep going, right? And it's because of this demand and supply issues. So that's a typical one. If it sounds like big heavy things are involved, right? Then it's like a high fixed cost business, and that's typically a sign that it's likely to be a supply, or the possibility for it to be a supply demand is likely. You almost never see a supply demand case for services businesses. So really high margin, low fixed cost, high variable cost businesses almost never have a supply demand issue. Sometimes it's demand, which is more of a business situation, but not really around supply. Okay? Because supply can scale very easily in that business. That's typically why that happens.